Politics often feels serious, but occasionally it crosses into the surreal. The latest example is Donald Trump's renewed suggestion that the United States should acquire Greenland, and his accompanying threat to impose sweeping tariffs on Europe if it does not happen. According to Trump, beginning February 1, the U.S. could place a 10% blanket tariff on a group of European countries, including Denmark, Germany, France, the UK, and several Nordic states. If no progress is made, those tariffs could rise to 25% by June. On the surface, it sounds like another impulsive trade threat, but beneath the spectacle lies a deeper legal and strategic game. At first glance, this appears absurd. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It is not for sale, and no European government has shown any interest in negotiating its transfer. The idea of using trade punishment to coerce allies into selling territory sounds more like satire than diplomacy. Yet the threat is not random. It is carefully shaped by legal constraints inside the United States and by long-standing strategic goals within the Pentagon. To understand why these tariffs are likely a bluff, we must begin with a quieter battle happening far from social media, inside the U.S. Supreme Court. The legal wall Trump keeps hitting. Although Trump often pushes presidential power to its limits, he still operates under the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution is explicit. Congress controls taxation and trade. Article 1 grants Congress the power to levy taxes and regulate commerce with foreign nations. In other words, presidents do not naturally possess the authority to impose tariffs. However, Congress can temporarily delegate some of its authority to the executive branch. This is where the International Emergency Economic Powers Act enters the picture. Passed during the Cold War, the law allows presidents to take sweeping economic actions during genuine national emergencies. It gives the executive power to restrict transactions, block trade, and regulate foreign economic activity. Trump has relied heavily on this law to justify tariffs in recent years. His administration argues that tariffs are simply a method of regulating importation and therefore fall within International Emergency Economic Powers Act scope. Critics disagree, and now the Supreme Court is weighing in. In the case Learning Resources v. Trump, the court examined whether International Emergency Economic Powers Act actually allows a president to impose tariffs. The justices focused on a key issue. The law never uses the words tax or tariff. It allows regulation, not taxation. Opponents argue that tariffs are fundamentally taxes because they extract money from American consumers and send it to the U.S. Treasury. Several conservative justices appeared skeptical of Trump's position. Amy Coney Barrett openly questioned whether any previous law had ever used regulate importation to mean impose taxes. Trump's legal team could not point to a single historical example. This matters because the Supreme Court applies stricter standards when a president claims broad powers over major economic policy. A minor regulatory tweak might pass quietly. A sweeping overhaul of global trade policy will not. Even more concerning for Trump is Justice Neil Gorsuch's suggestion that the entire International Emergency Economic Powers Act framework may be unconstitutional because Congress cannot permanently outsource its powers to the president. If that view gains traction, the legal foundation of Trump's trade strategy could collapse entirely. Many legal analysts now believe the court is more likely than not to restrict or overturn Trump's use of International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Betting markets currently place the odds at roughly 65% against the administration, a dangerous level of uncertainty for any long-term trade threat. Why Europe knows the threat is weak. European governments are not naive. They have followed the Supreme Court case closely because it affects every aspect of transatlantic trade. They understand that Trump's legal authority to impose long-lasting tariffs is fragile. This is why European leaders have not panicked. Public responses from European capitals have been firm but restrained. There is little incentive to concede to a threat that may soon be ruled illegal. Moreover, the proposed tariffs are not large enough to justify surrendering sovereign territory even if they were permanent. From Europe's perspective, the situation looks temporary. Trump may shout loudly, but the legal ground beneath him is unstable. That knowledge fundamentally weakens his leverage. So why make the threat at all? The strange pattern of Trump's targets. One detail reveals the deeper strategy. Trump did not threaten tariffs only against Denmark, the country that actually governs Greenland. He targeted a cluster of countries: the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. What do these nations share? They are precisely the European states most capable of deploying naval and military forces to the Arctic. They are NATO allies with the resources to operate in the Greenland region. Notably absent from the list are countries that support Denmark politically, but lack Arctic military relevance. This is not random economic punishment, it is strategic signaling. The tariff list maps neatly onto the Pentagon's long-term security priorities. The Pentagon's Quiet Arctic Strategy. For years, U.S. defense planners have wanted Europe to invest more heavily in Arctic security. As climate change opens new shipping routes and exposes mineral resources, the Arctic is becoming a major strategic theater. Russia and China are expanding their presence. Western governments have been slow to respond. Trump's aggressive rhetoric may appear chaotic, but it produces a predictable political effect in Europe. Voters react with anger and with resolve. Instead of yielding, European publics increasingly support strengthening their Arctic defenses. Several countries have already begun discussing expanded military commitments in the region. This outcome aligns almost perfectly with U.S. defense goals. Europe becomes more militarily engaged in the Arctic without Washington having to negotiate formal treaties or funding commitments. In this sense, the tariff threat functions less as a real economic weapon and more as a political catalyst. Trump's pattern of performative pressure. This strategy fits Trump's broader style. He frequently issues dramatic threats with short deadlines. The target government makes symbolic concessions. Trump then declares victory and retreats. The reputation is so consistent it has earned a nickname in Washington Taco: Trump always chickens out. Tariffs are particularly well suited for this theater because they generate headlines without requiring immediate action. Military force, by contrast, carries real costs and risks. That is why Trump's rhetoric is loudest, where American power is weakest. In the Greenland case, an actual invasion would trigger a domestic constitutional crisis and destroy U.S. alliances. Even Trump understands that. A loud bluff, however, costs little and may still deliver strategic benefits. The Supreme Court as the final constraint. The Supreme Court remains the key variable. Justices are not blind to political context. If Trump continues stretching International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify sweeping economic coercion, the court may act more decisively to restrict executive power. Ironically, the more aggressively Trump uses emergency authority, the more likely he is to lose it entirely. This legal uncertainty further reduces the credibility of the tariff threat. Europe understands that Trump may not legally be able to sustain such measures even if he wanted to. Is Trump driving policy or being driven? One unsettling implication remains. It is increasingly difficult to tell whether Trump is directing strategy or being steered by advisors who understand how to manipulate his instincts. Trump enjoys bold gestures and public confrontation. Defense officials may find that nudging him toward theatrical threats is easier than persuading Congress to fund Arctic expansion. If so, Trump becomes less a master strategist and more a blunt instrument, effective at provoking reactions, even if he does not fully grasp the long-term plan. A dangerous way to win. Even if the strategy works, it carries serious risks. Alienating major trade partners damages trust. It encourages consumer boycotts and political backlash. Over time, it accelerates Europe's desire for economic independence from the United States. Short-term strategic gains can easily produce long-term diplomatic losses. Great powers rarely decline from single defeats. They erode through repeated small miscalculations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden politics behind Trump's Greenland tariff threat, make sure you don't miss our next breakdown of the power games shaping the world right now. These stories are moving faster than the headlines, and we're here to decode what really matters beneath the noise. So if you want clearer thinking in a chaotic world, like and subscribe.